most important subject you can learn about in school is you. You're it. You're the most important thing that you need to learn about. Now, it doesn't seem that way because there's no class called you. And in fact, there's a lot of other classes that seem to be about a lot of other subjects. But when you think about the way life is going to be, right? Learning is not this thing that ends when school is over and then you just do something called life. Life is learning. Like, your personal life is going to change. You're going to, maybe get married and have children, and you're going to encounter challenges in that regard. Your professional life is going to change. You're going to try maybe different jobs and careers. And each of those changes and challenges is going to require you to learn something new. You're going to have to learn how to exist in a relationship with someone you share a life with. You're going to have to learn how to interact with children and how they grow and how they develop. You're going to have to learn what your job demands of you, what a difficult boss wants you to do. All of these things are areas where all of the learning skills that you got in school are going to be deployed to positively engage with those challenges and to get through those challenges. And so it's not really about the subjects you learn, although they have some importance, especially if you want to specialize in some of them. But what the subjects really are just different materials that you're using to figure out how you learn, how you handle those materials. And so the ultimate end of the learning process really should be you. Now, the problem is school really doesn't feel this way, right? Like, it doesn't feel like we're learning about ourselves a lot. In fact, most of the feedback that we get on our own learning goes to our parents and becomes like this thing that our parents look at. But our job is just to accomplish the learning in the class, to learn the subject, right? And the process of who we are as learners is something someone else is maybe thinking about or dealing with, but it's not something we're thinking about and dealing with. And I think that's a mistake. And I think there are two primary reasons for this mistake. Number one is marking, the fact that every course has a definitive numerical mark that tells you if you were successful or if you were not successful at your learning. And timing, that every course has to be completed in a 10-month or 4-month, depending on whether it's a semester or not, has to be completed in some defined time frame, right? And so you've got to get it done by this time, and you get a definitive mark that tells you if you were successful or not, and that's it, chance over, learning opportunity done. Those two things, I think, are the biggest challenges to really learning about the most important thing you need to learn about in high school, which is yourself. Now, I don't want anyone to get too excited. I don't have any solutions to get rid of marking or time frames around your learning. There's a system that's just bigger than me and you and all of us that's been structured in this way. And maybe one day it will change, but it's not changing, at least not in your time in high school. So it's not really a question of should we have marking and timing, but really the important question is, what do we do? How do we relate to our marks and to the artificial time frames that we have placed on our learning? How can we change our perception around those two things in order to better shift the focus from the subjects to ourselves? So I think we can look to the business world to try and gain some insight into this question. Daniel Pink is a best-selling author who's done a lot of really good work synthesizing studies that impact businesses. And one of the questions that he looked at, and I'll link to a TED Talk on this in the comments below, is what do companies do that can get the most out of their personnel? How can companies get the most out of their employees? And he said there are basically two methods, right, that companies can use. Method number one is what we would call the traditional method, which is carrots and sticks, right? Essentially finding positive and negative incentives to try and get people to do the right thing. And this would typically be like, if you perform your job better, you get a bonus. If you don't perform your job as well, you don't get that bonus. Maybe you get put on probation, and maybe eventually you get fired, right? So there's some combination of positive and negative incentives. That's very similar to what we have in school, right? If you do your job well, you learn your material within the defined time frame, and you get a good mark, then that's your reward. And if you fail to get your stuff done in the right time frame, you get penalized and you get a low mark, and that's your negative incentive, right? That's the traditional structure. It turns out that structure is really not effective for higher order thinking jobs, right? So in the business world, the carrots and sticks model works well for like assembly line work, for working at an Amazon warehouse, for maybe working in a restaurant, anything that's a very sort of repetitive task that doesn't require a lot of higher order thinking. Those type of positive and negative incentives work really well. But when you're talking about jobs that actually demand creativity, right, it turns out that the carrots and sticks model, right, doesn't actually allow, in fact, it negatively impacts creativity. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, if you need time to think of a new idea or to apply your learning to an unseen concept, right? The idea of a pressure of, if I do this right, I get a reward, and if I don't do it right, I get smacked, right? Like, that pressure does not allow the mind to be creative, right? The mind needs space. And so Pink raises this idea of what he calls autonomy, mastery, and purpose as the most important ways to facilitate creative thinking. So what is this idea of autonomy, mastery, and purpose? It's giving people autonomy, giving them space, extended time to work at their own pace until they master something, until they truly know something to the level of mastery, and allow those two things to help them find their purpose, right? By going through and trying things and failing and trying and failing, eventually you figure out what to do and you understand what you really love out of that concept. That method is totally not what marking and time frames in school provide for. But we're still left with the question, how can we merge this idea of autonomy and mastery and purpose into the carrots and sticks model of marks and timed courses, right? How do we do that? So I think what's interesting is if you look at the lessons learned from the first luchot to the second luchot divided by the Chet HaEgel, right? The biggest lesson that Chazal keep coming back to is this idea that the first luchot were made only by Hashem and the second luchot were made were a partnership between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael. We need to become part of the process of our learning, right? We need to stop thinking of our courses as, I need to know this subject so my teacher can then evaluate my learning and send that to my parents, right? No. We need to reflect on our own learning. And I want to make one suggestion to you for how to reflect on your learning. And that is to start a journal. And you're going to open this journal and enter information into the journal after you've completed any major unit, assignment, any sort of piece of study in your class. And you're going to ask yourself 3 questions that you're going to write some sentences about. Question number 1, what did I do when I studied for this test, when I was learning this process? What was my process, right? How did I go about doing it? So reflect on your process of learning. Question number 2, you're going to ask yourself is, was I successful in the conventional sense, in the carrots and sticks sense? Like, did I get a good mark, right? And question number 3, you're going to ask yourself is, what can I change next time? And maybe you didn't get a good mark, so you need to change something to improve it. Or maybe you got a good mark, but you realize I spent too much time on the wrong thing and I could cut down on that, right? And every single time you go through a new period of learning, you make a new entry into your journal. That process will slowly allow you to start reflecting on you. Because after all, you are the most important thing you learn about in high school. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.